We're going to start here with a critically important issue on the African continent, and that is the last colony left on the African continent, and that is Western Sahara, currently occupied by the nation of Morocco. Quite a bit happening there in the diplomatic front, as it were, and we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Mahjoub Maliha, who's the head of the External Relations Committee of CODESA, which is a collective of Sahrawi human rights defenders in the Western Sahara. Mahjoub, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eugene. It's always a pleasure to be with you in this show.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you. And, there's a lot happening. I mean, of course, for many of us who follow the African continent, the surprising, or maybe not surprising, trip by Jacob Zuma to Morocco. Now we've had the country of Portugal following closely behind, both of them saying they support the so-called autonomy plan for Western Sahara that Morocco has been shopping around the world diplomatically. And I guess I just want to start there. The way this is being presented by Morocco is they are not colonizing Western Sahara, and that this is their new plan to abide by the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. Can you talk about this plan and whether or not it is anything different from the past several decades of colonial occupation that we have seen in Western Sahara?
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you. It's a very good question. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you much about the autonomy plan because no one knows about it, including the Moroccan themselves, except few pages that were presented back in 2007 to the United Nations and Security Council as a proposal to be among the options for the self-determination. But Morocco never disclosed any details of that plan, how it will be implemented, what kind of rulings will be there, the distinguishing the powers. There is nothing basically clear, nor to the international community and nor to the Sahrawi people in Western Sahara. So that autonomy plan doesn't really exist. And in my personal opinion, I think the Moroccan constitution doesn't really allow such a plan to be implemented in Western Sahara, being an authoritarian regime with a centralized power in the palace of the king. So that is a start point where you cannot have an autonomy plan without having a democracy. Let's say that we, the Sahrawis, agree on that, but there is no basis for that plan to be implemented. However, any proposal, any plan, we have also heard Stefan de Mistura, who is the personal envoy of the United Nations Secretary General to the Western Sahara, proposing a separation plan of the territory, and labeling that as thinking outside the box. So what we say is, you think in the box, outside the box, any plan cannot be implemented in Western Sahara without fulfilling or complying with the international law and guaranteeing the fundamental right of self-determination of the Sahrawi people. At the end, it is the Sahrawi people who should agree or disagree on any proposal, any plan to take place in Western Sahara. If you allow me, Eugene, to
Please.
comment on the recent developments and the marketing campaign that Morocco is taking in relation to advertising its autonomy plan. Recently, the Jacob Zuma from South Africa, from Okmuntu Wisizwe party, the MK, or the Nation's Arrow party. That is, first of all, to start with, it is in contradiction with the consensus that is in South Africa, whether among the people of South Africa and the political parties in South Africa, who all support the self-determination of the Sahrawi people and the decolonization process in Western Sahara, and support the freedom of all occupied territories among the world, including Palestine, of course. So this contradiction came by Jacob Zuma, and this is, it seems, that a hobby of the Moroccan authorities in the recent years is to gain international or outside support to their so-called autonomy plan in Western Sahara. However, what I can say there, Eugene, is no one has the ownership over Western Sahara except the Sahrawi people. It is the Sahrawi people who can give it or take it back from the occupation. And it doesn't really make any difference on the international level, as we have seen proclamation from President Trump in his first term in the US presidency, and we have seen also proclamations from Sanchez of Spain, Macron of France. But does it really have an impact on the legal ground or legal basis of the question of Western Sahara? The answer is it doesn't. It doesn't have any impact because Morocco is a hostile occupying power in Western Sahara, and it will remain as such unless the Sahrawi people are allowed to exercise their fundamental right to self-determination and choose their political future.
I really appreciate that framing and those points. And one of the things I guess maybe we should also say for people who don't know as much about the issue is, this is Morocco having taken over a long-held colonial claim of Spain and others. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, Morocco, they don't think about it like a European country, and so it might not, they seem like, oh, how is this a colony? How are they colonizing? So if you could give us some of that history and that background about the long history of colonization in Western Sahara and the connection between this historic colonization and Morocco's ongoing claims.
Yeah, well, the history of Western Sahara's question goes back to the Cold War era, where Morocco sided with the US and other allies in the Western world, let's say. And Western Sahara used to be a Spanish colony. Spain decided to withdraw from the territory without fulfilling its international obligations toward the territory of Western Sahara, which means without properly decolonizing the territory. So they decided back in 1975 to withdraw from the territory and signing a treaty called the Madrid Treaty between Morocco and Mauritania and Spain, dividing the territory among the two neighboring countries, Mauritania and Morocco. So after that, Morocco invaded the territory, or during that, Morocco invaded the territory and tried to annex the territory by force to its national territory. The Sahrawi people has established a national liberation movement, which is known as the Polisario Front, the Front for Liberating the Saga Hamra and Rio de Oro, which are the two main rivers from the north to the south of the territory of Western Sahara. So the Polisario Front picked up the arms to liberate the territory from the Spanish colony back in 73, exactly 10 May 1973. And during that struggle and resistance against the Spanish colony, the territory was handed over to two neighboring countries. Morocco, of course, extended its military operations on the territory, and Polisario Front has been obliged and forced to pick up the arms against the two neighboring countries, Morocco and Mauritania. In 1979, Mauritania decided finally to rectify its mistakes and recognize the Sahrawi Republic and withdraw its claims from the Western Sahara. In contrary, Morocco decided to continue the annexation strategy and policy to annex the additional territories of Western Sahara. So from that time up to 1991, there was a war between the Moroccan military army or Moroccan occupation army and the Polisario Front, who are the indigenous representatives and the sole and legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people. The UN came in 1991 to broker a ceasefire and a deal between Morocco and the Polisario Front, with the promise to organize a referendum that will allow the Sahrawi people to exercise their fundamental right of self-determination and choose whether to be or not part of Morocco or to be an independent state. So since 1991, there was a mission of the United Nations created by a Security Council resolution called MINURSO, And the MINURSO is an abbreviation of the Mission of the United Nations for Organization of the Referendum in Western Sahara. Up to today, for over 33, 34 years, we are still waiting for that referendum to take place, which was always blocked by the Moroccan occupation forces. So recently in 2020, Polisario Morocco instead decided to create a breach in the territory in the borders between the Western Sahara and Mauritania, where in a breach of the ceasefire agreement and its protocols. So where that's forced the Polisario to declare the ceasefire agreement to be nullified and back to the armed struggles. So since then, there is clashes among between the Moroccan occupation army and the Polisario front across the separation wall. The separation wall is a wall that is built by the Moroccan occupation forces, 2,700 kilometers long, equipped with anti-personnel, anti-vehicles landmines. So that leaves the Sahara people separated into parties. The part that lives in the occupied territories under suppression, oppression, violence, human rights violations, imprisonment, forced allegiance, and so on, of the consequences of occupation, and the other half that lives in the refugee camps in South Algeria of Tindouf in a harsh environment, depending on humanitarian aid. So the whole story basically dates back to over 50 years back. So half a century that Morocco is occupying the territory of Western Sahara, forcing its people to be separated and implementing expansion, settlement strategies, forced allegiance, and so on of the occupation policies. It is the time that the world has to put an end to the longest standing occupation in Africa. And it is indeed, as you said during the introduction of Jean, it is the last colony of Africa that still awaits justice and still awaits a resolution by the international community. However, from our part, as human rights defenders and on behalf of CODESA, we see that is a reflection of the failure of the international community. And that continues to give us more and more doubts about the international order as it is right now, especially after what we have seen in Gaza. Crimes against humanity, starvation, every single rule of the international law has been violated in Gaza against the Palestinian people, and we don't see any of the international community blink for that. And that really raised major concern to us. How far and how long can we still believe the international law, and how far and how long can we still believe in the peaceful struggle? And that is maybe an alarm to be given to the international community to take actions to put end to injustice everywhere in the world, in Western Sahara, in Palestine, and everywhere else in the world.
You know, briefly in this last couple minutes here we have, I also want to note, I mean, you know, when we're talking about colonies, everyone knows that money is being made. And so thinking about what Morocco is getting out of this, can you talk about the exploitation that's happening in the occupied territories of both resources and human resources?
Yeah, definitely. Every occupation is driven by financial or economical interest, and Morocco has major interest in the natural resources in Western Sahara, which is a very rich country when it comes to natural resources, whether it is renewable energies, solar and wind energies, or non-renewable energies such as phosphate, fish stocks, uranium, gold, and so on. We can keep going counting the riches in Western Sahara. So Morocco is illegally exploiting the natural resources in Western Sahara, and not only that, by using it as a tool to sustain its military occupation by different means, by basically financing its military occupation and military presence in Western Sahara, but also to involve international actor and what we call internationalization of the occupation. involving multinational companies to invest and be tied to the Moroccan propaganda, as well as gaining support, as we have seen from from Jacob Zuma or any other leader who may come up and speak in favor of the so-called autonomy plan. So, and this happening in contradiction with international law. And we have seen recently the Court of Justice of the European Union issuing rulings stating clearly that Morocco has no sovereignty over Western Sahara, that the natural resources of Western Sahara cannot be dealt with through Morocco, and that any economic activities that to take place in the occupied Western Sahara has to have the consent of the Sahrawi people or its representative, which is in this case the Polisario Front. And we see the EU still engaging in exploiting the natural resource of Western Sahara. So that brings us back to the question of how the international law is implemented or respected by those who claim to create it and defend it. So briefly, Eugene, the natural resources, of course, is also used to manage the demographic engineering and demographic transfer in Western Sahara by bringing thousands and thousands of settlers, of Moroccan settlers, into the territory to make them Sahrawis as a minority, which they are right now, and of course to bribe international actors. I won't be surprised that Zuma or any other leader that is stating such a statement that has a deal behind the scene to make such a statement. However, on the other hand, not only using the natural resources, but also what we have seen since the so-called Abraham Accord, where Morocco play a key role, that Morocco is used now as a platform to settle the scores with countries who oppose the Israelis' occupation in Western Sahara. And it's not a surprise to see Zuma in a form of score settling with South Africa after the International Court of Justice case against Netanyahu.
Mahjoub Maliha of CODESA, thank you so much as always for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you all for having me. It's always a pleasure.